So let's work on the shopping list added component. In its template, I want to add a bootstrap row, and in there I want to have a column spanning the full width, like that. And in there, I'll add a form element. Now important, remove the action because we're not going to send a request to the server once this is submitted. But we will have a look at submitting forms later in this course. We have a whole section about that, and that is when we will fill this form with more life. For now in this form I want to have a row, and this should now maybe have a width of only 5 on small devices. On very small devices it should span the full width, which is why I'm using the SM class here. And it should also have the form group bootstrap class attached to it, this div. And in here I'll have a label for the name of my item, so I'll say name here as a text, and I'll add an input of type text, that's correct, with ID name, so that this label refers to it. And then here, this should receive the class form control to make it look nice in Bootstrap's world. Next to it, and that is why I chose to not give this column the full width, I want to have another div with a width of, let's say, 2, because it's going to be a very small input. Then also the form group div, or a class here. And in there another label for the amount, so let's say amount here. And then an input of type text here, or maybe even of type number to be honest, which gets the ID, amount, and then the class form control. So that should give us the inputs the user will later use to add new ingredients. Below my inputs here, I'll add another row, which will now span the full width. And here I want to have a couple of buttons which allow me to manage this item creation or editing process. The first button I'll add here with the style of button success to make it look green in Bootstrap's world will be of type submit, because this button should actually submit the form later, and I will say add there because it allows us to add a new item. The second button will be of type button because it should not submit the form. This button should simply delete the selected recipe ingredient, because later we will be able to click an ingredient. It will then be loaded into the input fields up here. And if we click delete, well, it simply will be removed. So delete item, or just delete maybe. And then the last one, which allows us to clear the form. If we loaded the item, we wanted to add it, and then decided to not do that, I want to have a button which allows me to clear the form. So here I will maybe make this blue with button primary. If we save this, this is actually how I want this form to look. We have an input field for the amount, for the name, and our buttons which later will be filled with some life so that we can manage this ingredient. So that's the first basic setup. Of course we can improve this app. For example, I don't want to have recipes and shopping list component on the same page. We will fix this soon, first temporarily and then with a real good solution later in the course. And I also want to have my components communicate with each other so that we can actually store the content of the items in our recipe list in their own component, that we can select a recipe here and load it in the detail section, and so on. For now though, that is how far we can go with the knowledge we gathered. The blocking thing right now is the component communication, and that is why we're going to dive into this in the next course section. See you there, and then see you back in this project later in the course. Welcome to another course module. By now, the basics should be set, and we had a closer look at what makes up an Angular app. Now, chances are you already encountered your first error in your app. We even had some errors together in the apps we built. Now, fixing these errors is of course very important and not always straightforward. That is why in this section we're going to have a brief look at the tools we have at our disposal for fixing errors in our Angular app. Here's a little example app attached to this lecture, which looks nice but won't work as expected. We are on our server's dashboard, we could say. But if I click Add Server to add a new server, watch what happens. We get an error. Now, you might get such errors a lot. And generally, you might not always have your developer console open, though for developing that's a good idea. But if something doesn't work the way you expect it to work, like here when you click the button and nothing happens, opening the console, the developer tools, and there the JavaScript console is a great idea. Now here we clearly get an error message. And error messages have gotten better in Angular, so chances are the error message is indeed helpful. So let's have a look at the error message. You should find it right at the top, and here it says that in app component, that's the first important information piece. In the inline template, then this would be the line number and then the column where in the line, so line 4, now let's see if that is helpful. That there the error was caused because we cannot read the property push of undefined. Well, we get a couple of useful information pieces here. So let's go to the app component then, and let's have a look at it. If we go there, well, the line 4 argument is only kind of helpful because line 4 is neither the problematic core code in our template nor in the TypeScript file. It reports as line 4 because in the end everything gets merged together and rebuilt, so that is why probably the code then is triggered in line 4 in the final code, but not in our code. Still, we got one important clue here, property push of undefined. So we try to call push on something which is not defined at the point of time we do call it. So if we have a look at our code here, we see that there's only one place where we call push. And that is of course here in the onAddServer method, which makes sense because this is the method which gets triggered once we click the button. So that would have been another way of finding where the problematic code has to be. As this error occurred when we click the button, it probably is somewhere in the method which is then executed. So here there's something wrong with pushing. Though not with pushing itself. Remember, it said push of undefined. So the thing we're calling push on is undefined, so that would be this service. How can this service be undefined? We do declare it up here, right? That's exactly the issue in this case. We do declare it here, but we don't define it. We tell TypeScript there's going to be a property called service, but we don't initialize it. It doesn't have any value assigned to it. It's not an empty array, it's not a string, it's nothing. So to fix our code, we simply have to make sure that before trying to push a new item on servers, we set servers to an array, because otherwise it could be anything. It's undefined in the end. So pushing is not as supported here. So what we can do is we can simply initialize an empty array here at the beginning, and with this little change in place, this should now work as expected. Once it reloads and we click Add Server, now we can add our servers to this list. So this was a brief example for a potential error message, how to read it and how to try to get to the root of the error. Now, of course, it's impossible for me to show all possible error messages and what can go wrong. And there are some more tricky error messages, but it's always great to not panic, but have a look at the message, read which file it points to, read the exact message. There are even error messages in Angular which are much clearer than the one I just showed you. And with that, you should be able to narrow down the issue and hopefully solve it. Sometimes reading error messages is not enough, or you don't even get an error message. Like here, I got my servers here, right? And if I click on them, I can delete them and it seems to work until I click the last one, or if I deleted all of them, the only one. So deleting the last server is not working. I can click it as often as I want. It's not going away. Now, if you have a look at our code at the template first, we see that on each list item, I call onRemoveServer, and I do pass I, the index of the current iteration, to that method. Now, of course, we could simply dive into the TypeScript code here and have a look at this. And there we see, well, we get the position of this item, and then we simply call splice to remove the item, the element in this array at this position. So you might say, well, that looks all right. Sometimes it's just not super easy to debug a message like this because we're not getting an error message, but we get a logical error in our app. Now, debugging is supported by developer tools in the browser though. So it would be great if we could simply check at runtime why this is not working. In Chrome, you can simply go to Sources, and here you will find all these sources imported on this page. So in this case, all our script bundles. There are a couple of bundles as you see. The important one for us is of course the main bundle. And if we have a look at the main bundle, yeah, that's not super easy to debug, right? Now, theoretically, of course, we can have a look at it. And there, let's find, this seems to be our template here with container and row. And maybe we can find the line responsible for splicing here. And now maybe we want to debug here. And if you try to place a breakpoint here, which you of course can do in your developer tools, you see something changed. It jumped to the app component TypeScript file. Now remember, TypeScript is not what runs in the browser. So there, the JavaScript, these bundles here are used. How can we now access TypeScript? Because these JavaScript files support source maps. Source maps are a little addition the CLI kind of adds to our bundles, which allow the browser to translate our JavaScript code to TypeScript or to simply map the JavaScript code to our TypeScript files. In development only, these source maps will be stripped out for production, of course. So this is a great feature because now we can place breakpoints here in our TypeScript code. And if I now click somewhere, you see it indeed pauses. And now we can check and even see that ID currently is 2, which makes sense because I clicked this item here, which has an ID of 2. Just to show this again, here now with this item. Now it's ID 1 because, again, the middle item, which is ID 1 in this case because we start at 0 for the first item. And then we see that position is undefined right now. Now we can move on a step. Now we see position is 2. And now we can also check servers. And in servers we see, well, position 2 of course is the last server in the list. So if we let this continue, it looks like the middle one was removed, but actually the last one was removed. And we can confirm this by checking this. If I click on the last one, which was the thing which was not working, we see ID is 1, makes sense, it's the second element of 2 and the ID starts at 0, so ID 1 makes sense. But now position is 2 because we add 1 to the ID. So now we try to delete the element at position 2 in this servers array, and clearly we don't have that element here. We only have 2 elements with positions 0 and 1. So the logical error in our code is that we add 1 to the ID here. And that is how we could debug that with the TypeScript code here with that source map. That of course would allow us to now fix this bug. Now correctly you might say, that's awesome, that's great, but if I have to scan my main bundle to then click somewhere to open the TypeScript file, that's not really a great, well, tool, because if that bundle grows bigger, it gets even harder to find the right, well, spot. Therefore, you can directly access your TypeScript files. Under Webpack here, you should find a couple of subfolders. And if you open up the dot folder here and then source here in the app folder and so on, you find all your TypeScript files. So here is where you can directly access your TypeScript files in the same structure as in your project to easily find the file you want to dive into and you want to debug with the Chrome developer tools. So that is another great tool at your disposal besides reading error messages, using the debugger with source maps, with TypeScript files, to either of course dive into errors for which you have error messages, but also into logical errors like here.